In this video, we're going to practice proper punctuation. So before we start, make sure you've read the section on punctuation in your handbook. Also, please either download or print out this handout so you can work on it as we go along. So I wanted to teach 6 types of punctuation here that are the most common punctuation errors I see. So I decided to make some exercises based on the 6 wives of Henry VIII, and for each wife we have a different punctuation error that we're going to be practicing avoiding. All right, so the first one we're going to do is really a sentence structure error, but it involves punctuation. That's comma splices. So just to remind ourselves, a comma splice is when you have 2 independent clauses in the same sentence, and you're joining them with only a comma, which is an error, because in order to join 2 independent clauses, you need either a semicolon, which is a comma with a period over it, a comma plus a conjunction, like comma and or comma but, or a period, and just make them separate sentences. So what I'd like you to do for this passage here about the first wife, Catherine of Aragon, is to find the comma splices and then fix them. So pause the video to do that, and then we'll come back and I'll show you where they are and how you might fix them. Okay, so there are 3 comma splices in this passage, and the first one is right here before however, because you have a complete sentence here. If you read that, that could stand alone, and then this could be a complete sentence here. So each of those is an independent clause. So in order to fix this, you would need to either put a semicolon here or a period. I'm going to do a period because this is kind of a long sentence if we put it all together. All right. The second comma splice is right after the quote. So this is another common type of comma splice I see, where someone has a quote which is really a complete sentence or independent clause, and then they'll just put a comma and start a new independent clause. And you don't want to do that. Really, after a quote, generally you start a new sentence. You could also do a semicolon there, but that's a comma splice that needs fixing. And lastly, we have a comma splice right here, because this could be an independent clause, right? It can stand alone, and so could that. So we need to put, I'm going to put a semicolon there. We could do a period there, but that fixes the 3 comma splices in that passage in order to review that important rule. And by the way, this is the daughter that Henry VIII had with Catherine of Aragon, Queen Mary, known as Bloody Mary, and she burned people at the stake. All right, let's go to our second punctuation lesson, which is using commas with conjunctions, which we've already previewed a little bit. So if you have 2 independent clauses in the same sentence, and you join those 2 with a conjunction, you have to put a comma in front of the conjunction. So the conjunctions are and, but, or, nor, for, so, or yet. So if both sides of one of those words in a sentence is independent, you have to put a comma in front of it. But if both sides aren't independent, you can't have the comma, right? It's wrong to put it in front of a conjunction. If both sides aren't independent, it's almost always the second side that's not. So you've got to look at that second side, and if you see a conjunction like an and or but, look at this part of the sentence after it and say, is that really independent? All right, so pause the video, and I want you here to add commas before conjunctions where they're needed. And there are also a few that need to be removed where they shouldn't be. So take a minute to do that, and then we'll come back and I'll show you the correct answers. Okay, so coming back here, we need to put a comma before this and, because both sides of that are independent clauses. Each of those could be a sentence unto itself, so we need a comma there. And actually we need a comma Here, because we have 3 independent clauses in this sentence, that's a little unusual. 1, 2, and then 3. So that and that but are the dividing points for independent clauses within a sentence, so they get a comma in front of it. All right. This comma here, though, has to go, because if you look at what comes after the and, it's not complete. It just says that this was why he had no sons with her. That's just an object phrase. So that can't stand alone, so the comma has to go here. All right, continuing on. After annulled and before but, we need a comma because both sides of that are independent, right? That's independent and that is. So therefore we need the comma in front of the but. All right, moving downward here. This comma has to go because after the and, there's no subject. It just says married and shortly thereafter, which is fine, but it's not an independent clause, so it's just got to be in this sentence without a comma before the and. You see, the comma before the conjunction shows you that a new independent clause is starting. That's why we put it there. It helps you read. Okay. Same thing here. Before this and, that comma has to go because look at that. That's obviously not an independent clause there. Here, we need a comma before this and because that's where 2 independent clauses divide. That's a little bit of a tricky one because we've got an independent clause here, and then this is actually an intro phrase for this independent clause, but that's the other one. So the dividing point is there, which shows you why it's important to put the comma so people know that that is a dividing point, comma, and telling us that a new independent clause is beginning. And then lastly, that comma has to go because the part of the sentence after that is just not an independent clause. There's no subject. All right. So my pictures here that go along with this are of the Tower of London, where Anne Boleyn was beheaded. This is a picture I took when I was there. And this is the site where she was beheaded. It's a glass table with a little glass pillow on it. And this is a picture of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn's daughter, Queen Elizabeth I. And ironically, she was one of the greatest monarchs England ever had. Some people say she was the greatest one of all. And of course, Henry was so worried about having a daughter and wanting a male heir, but even though he didn't know it, he had one of the greatest monarchs of England as his heir with Anne Boleyn. Okay, so we've covered comma splices here and commas with conjunctions. We'll continue in the next video to look at some other punctuation rules.